This is Jamarco Burst, and this is the Drugs and Crime, Chapter 12, Drugs, America and Society, and Alcohol, Drugs, and Society class. Hopefully you can see the screen kind of clear. I'll try not to shake too much, but it'll be a lot clearer once I submit it on Canvas. But I'm going to just hop right into it. So this was Chapter 12 out of the book for our class, and Eric Goode is the author of this book. And basically the main focus of chapter 12 was kind of to show the connection between drugs and that relationship between drugs and crime and the effects that they have on people's behavior and people in the society. And then Goode just kind of goes into detail and explains the amount of crimes, that are tied with under the influence of drugs or just drug use in general. The chapter also goes and gets in more depth and kind of talks about the distribution or rave trafficking, like all of these different type of crimes that all lead back to drug use or drug abuse. Goode also talks about the law enforcement, like how restricted laws can be against certain minorities, certain groups, and kind of what that process looks like and how does law enforcement respond to drug crimes. But the main focus is just helping us understand the impact drugs can have on us and our society and just the crucial amount and different type of crimes that all lead back to drug use. And to just kind of expand on it, I don't know if people really understand like how many crimes really do lead back to drug use. You see drug bust, drug sales going wrong, like all those things end up in, somebody dying, people coming up missing, people getting hurt. Like it's just drugs can play a big role in criminal behavior. So let me go on to the next slide and we can keep going forward. So concepts and themes. So like I was saying, the drug crime relationship, Goode kind of explained that not all people use drugs are always criminals. There's other factors that can cause somebody to use drugs, like things mentally or just their environment in general. There's people that grow up in rough neighborhoods, seeing things at a young age, and at that time, drugs may have been something to keep them, coping, or they just seen other people in the neighborhood do it growing up young, and they got put on to doing those things at a young age, and it just became a habit of daily life. Doesn't make them a criminal, that's just what they know. So that's what Goode is trying to explain. People just assumed, if you do drugs, you're a criminal, and that sometimes that's not always the case. There's different mottos talked about in this chapter. First one was enslavement motto, and I kind of just summed these up just to try to save some space. But enslavement, basically, people commit crimes to support habits. So like I just said, like some people, they are criminal with the drugs, but they have to do what they have to do basically just to keep them in a safe space, to feel like they're still sticking to their same routine. For example, selling drugs, like certain drugs that, in certain places that could be illegal, just moving weight, as people say today, like to them, that's a way to survive, even though it may be illegal in other people's eyes or criminal in other people's eyes, but to them, that may be, a way to survive. That's all they ever known. Then predisposition is another motto. People have always been in crime and drug environment. So similar to enslavement, this is kind of just that this is what they were born into. This is what they do. It's almost like, you don't really have another option. It's just a way of life, and it's the way they've grown up. So does this really make them criminal, or is this just their way of life, the only way that they've known? Then the last motto, intensification motto. This motto is interesting to me because it's kind of a mixture of the other two mottos. And basically just kind of explains that drugs do instigate criminal behavior. So you have the two up top mottos where, this is like their lifestyle, this is what they were born into kind of type of thing. Intensification just goes to, yes, that may be true, but drugs still instigate criminal behavior and still cause people to act out of character or do things out in society that can be harmful or dangerous. We were asked to explain some strengths and weaknesses about the model we chose. So I chose intensification. That's why it's highlighted here. The one strength I took from it, this model, it kind of focused more on the criminal like tendencies rather than just drug use. And I feel like that's important because if we just focus on drug use, you don't really pay attention to the criminal acts and the criminal ways of a way a person could be moving or a certain group could be moving, rather just focusing on just trying to spot drugs all the time. Because there's a lot of other things, like, because everybody that does drugs is not a criminal. So I feel like paying attention to the criminal tendencies is important. Weakness with this model, I just feel like the only downfall to focusing on criminals, this model downplays the role that drug use does have in criminal acts. I mean, it needs to be a balance between the two, because if you vice versa, just focus on the criminal tendencies and not pay as much attention to drug use, then I feel like missing that is also another important thing. So that was just kind of the weakness that I took from that one. To the next. Sociological insight. So in this section, we were told to kind of explain how drug use affects certain races and groups, and how does the law enforcement handle these things, how does society handle these things, the government handle these different type of things. So just doing research and reading into the book during this semester, and just based off what I've already known, and me being African American myself, and paying attention to the news and things like that, majority of the time people of color, Black, Mexican, whatever you want to say, just people of color in general, most of the time they're the main targets when it comes to any drug-related crimes. Any poor income neighborhoods, a lot of drug-related busts or drug-related crimes happens in these neighborhoods. The rates of arrest in these neighborhoods, and for Black people or Hispanic people or any people of color, are way higher than any other race. It's very rare. I won't say rare, it's very low. And Caucasian, white, or, anything outside of color, it's just low to see drug arrests in them same groups or these races. Is mainly seen in Black and Hispanic. And the reason you'll see them, the race like white or anything other than color, most of the time those are more wealthier neighborhoods, people, with higher income, more resources. So people, these people that have money can go to rehab and get fixed and not have to face the consequences of dealing with law enforcement. If they do have to deal with law enforcement, they'll have the ability to have a great lawyer to get them out of that sticky situation and still get the help they need. Whereas people of color in lower income neighborhoods and smaller minorities, they deal with, when they have to deal with law enforcement, they're doing prison time. They don't have access to, the greatest lawyers. They don't have access to rehab centers. It's just, facing hard time and just get on with it and just put them away. So I feel like that's the difference between the races when it comes to drug arrest and drug abuse, and just the way that different races are handled when it comes to addressing the situation. One of the theories that I took from the book in this section, the labeling theory Good talked about, I thought this was really good because this happens a lot. And I feel like this will continue to happen, in today's society. Good explained that race and class influences who gets labeled as criminals or addicts, even though it may be equal for all races and classes. Now, it was kind of hard to understand, but when you really, read it again, Good explained that race and class influences who gets labeled as criminals or addicts, even though it may be equal for all races and classes. To me, the labeling theory just goes to explain that doing drugs shouldn't be right for anybody. We should all face the same consequences, but for those that fit the description as the norm of the race or the group that normally is addicts or normally are criminals in society's eyes, they immediately face the consequences and punishments, but it should be equal for all. So that's why I really like that theory, because I feel like that's the way that things should be. And I was glad that Good kind of put emphasis on that in the book. And then here on the pictures, I just kind of, added some images. I'll scoot up a little bit. It's just some police officers. You got 2 African-American males being interrogated. Just, kind of get the image of in your head. And then you have, minority group again, protesting no more drug war and just kind of trying to fight back, all the things that come with just getting labeled and thrown into a category, just the same things we see from day to day. Go on to the next slide. Policy and social implications. So the criminal justice policy, mandatory minimum sentences. I didn't know about this until I read this book, so I thought this was interesting. But basically, this is where you have fixed prison terms for certain drug offenses. So obviously, being a partaker and selling drugs or moving drugs or just it's gonna be different levels to it versus somebody who just smokes it, and somebody that sells it, or somebody that's harming people because they're under the influence all the time. So it's different levels to it and different terms for each abuse of drugs. More funding for the law enforcement was talked about in this chapter, which we've heard about that all the time, funding the police, defunding the police. And basically, this is, if you do fund the law enforcement more, this would just give, more drug agencies more resources and allow them to take down the ones that are abusing drugs and come into communities. And if they wanted to come in, even for certain races, and just allow them to be able to move a lot quicker and try to put a resolution in drug abuse. The next thing talked about expanding prisons. Basically, if in the book it explained, if this was to happen, incarceration rates would just really probably skyrocket, because you just making more space for more things, for more room for people to be in there, and then the laws would just continue to get harsher in that way to use the expanded space. So I feel like this would just, make it a lot harder. Public perception. Good talked about this in the book as well. It's basically just the display of drugs from media and how they can exaggerate the cases and view of drug-related crimes. So basically what that means, social media, you'll see like a celebrity get caught up in some drug stuff, or just really anybody, honestly, and they'll kind of blast it like they just, did something that somebody else already has done, but they just make it seem like it's so bad, and they just did the worst thing in the world. And Good basically explains, like, when the media does this, this just does not help the issue. And then if the media hypes up these issues, then, we will continue to just see kind of a push for more strict laws and enforcement on drug use, and people would just push against it. And Good kind of argued, in the book, he used the term war on drugs. And he argued that it's not been much about crime reduction, and it's more just a term used for politics. And that's why I took this little clip out of a magazine article, should drugs be made legal? Because I know today that's a big argument. For example, marijuana, like, that's been a fight for a while if it should be legalized or not, because people see health benefits with that, and then other people think it's just an excuse for people to smoke weed, basically. But the media is dangerous when it comes to drug use, because it's very persuasive, it's very manipulative. Like, he just explains, like, it can become dangerous, and the media will exaggerate things, so we just have to be careful for that and not really let that determine the fact of what needs to be done for drugs in our societies. Go on to the next slide. So this is the last slide here. Just my thoughts and comments on how I feel about the chapter. I mean, I felt that Good did a good job, really helping the readers and showing us the drug and crime connection, and just how complicated things really are, and the relationship isn't as smooth as it should be. I feel like, for me personally, this chapter kind of really did things while I was reading, just because, I've had family deal with some of these things. Some of them have been criminal, and some of them haven't, but they still have the habits. They still use the drugs, you know, on a day-to-day basis just because they've developed these habits, and they don't have any criminal activity going on. It's just become a habit for them. And I just feel like it's going to be important for us in the future to find ways to limit drug abuse and, you know, crime with drugs involved. And I feel like if people are going to do drugs and they want to face the consequences should be equal. It shouldn't be based on race or what income, neighborhood you're from, and things of that nature. Because, I mean, if it's wrong, it's wrong. But if only a certain group of people get penalized and punished and others get set free or get a way out of it, then will we ever really, you know, come to a resolution? And I just put this picture there just for kind of decoration. But overall, the book, you know, opened my eyes to a lot. And I was able to make good connections and really just take good information from it. So that's all.